Order, order. Can I welcome members and witnesses to this meeting of the Education Select Committee this morning. This meeting is the final evidence session in our committee's inquiry on children's social care, and we're pleased to welcome the Minister for Children and Families, Janet Daby, and her official, Fran, Oram, to give evidence to us this morning. Can I first of all ask the Minister and her official to introduce yourselves to us?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Janet Daby and I'm the Minister for Children's Social Care.
And I'm Fran Oram and I'm Director of Children's Social Care at the Department for Education.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to begin our questioning this morning. You are introducing a number of reforms to the children's social care system through the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill, which is being debated in Parliament at the moment. Can I ask what engagement you've had directly with care-experienced young people when developing the policies that are in the bill to make sure that their voices are heard and used directly to inform the changes that you're trying to make?
Yeah, thank you. So, obviously the process to where we've got to now has been through the care review. And Fran will say more about the processes, because this obviously process for where we are now took place with a lot of work was done with the previous government in terms of the care review. But in terms of since I've been in this position as the Minister, I've had multiple engagements with children and care leavers, listening to their views and their wishes, and really making sure that their voices are always being heard, both with children that are in foster care, children that have been adopted, children that are care leavers, and also with their foster carers and their carers as well. Just making sure that that their welfare concerns remain of my paramount concern, really. And that's both been virtually, both been in person, and different parts of the country as well. And I'll pass on to Fran.
Thank you. So as the Minister said, the process that has led up to the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill started actually quite a number of years ago, and engagement with children and young people with care experience was an integral part of all of the work that's happened in the lead up to the bill. So as the Minister referred to the independent care review that Josh McAllister led, he had children and young people with care experience as a core part of his team, inputting on sort of all of the measures that went into his independent report. Then the previous administration set up a national implementation board that was chaired by a minister and that had young people with care experience as sort of formal members of that board, and other people with lived experience too, parents and so on. And then since then, we've continued that engagement. So we've got a children and young people's board that meets, I think, every 6 weeks or so with officials, and we bring different sort of elements of the reform agenda to that and test them and seek input from them. So, and as the Minister says then, on sort of visits around the country and so on, we always make sure that we're sort of meeting and engaging with people with lived experience. So I think it really has sort of run through all of the elements of the reform agenda.
Thank you. The number of children in care has risen quite dramatically over the last decade, and that's increased the pressure on the system, and particularly, I think, for the sort of cohort of older children, teenagers entering the care system, whose needs can be quite complex by the time that they're entering care. What plans does the government have to provide more support for early intervention to enable more children to stay with their families and reduce the numbers who are coming into care?
So you're absolutely right. There's many challenges that we face now that we're in government, and one of those is that over the last 10 years, the number of looked after children has increased by 22% and is reaching 83,630. So there are many challenges, which is obviously why the bill is so crucial in making sure that we look at the early intervention, the prevention work, making sure that we get that in place to support children to stay with their families or to stay within other family provision, as well as dealing with other issues to try and reduce that number and to deal with profiteering. But in terms of teenagers and older children that are already with foster care placements, and they continue to need ongoing support and care. There are obviously they have their LAC review meetings, so that is all to do with the arrangements and the planning around the child, and that then will look at the sort of like the welfare needs of the child, the long-term chances of the child for education, their education, their social relationships, their communication, looking at what provision they will go on to. But you'll probably be aware that in the bill itself we're looking at staying close, and staying close is actually a provision which then allows children that where they are in not just, we already have a provision in place if they're in foster care to stay there longer, but if they're staying close is to do with if they're not in foster care provision and they're in children's homes or other types of places, if they want those support mechanisms to be able to stay longer in those placements to get the support they need, then they will, and they can do that. And obviously there's the personal advisors that are in place for care leavers as well.
So those are positive measures for children who are already in the care system.
Sure.
My question was really about the kind of early intervention that stops children from entering care in the first place. And I just wanted to ask you about two aspects of that. Sure. So the bill is strong on family group decision making, and once a child is identified as being in need of intervention to protect them, involving the wider family group and helping children to stay within kinship care and so on. But there has been an erosion over the last 14 years in that early help and support that prevents families from getting into a crisis in the first place. And there aren't measures in the bill that deal substantively with that lack of early intervention and support. So I want to ask about that. And then the second thing is for the cohort of teenagers. So what we're seeing increasingly is teenagers entering the care system because of extra-familial harm. So exploitation, county lines exploitation, those kinds of things, and their families being unable to keep them safe from those harms. And often the outcomes for those teenagers are really terrible, like we take them away from the bit of security that they have within their family because their family can't keep them safe, and we put them into a world that has many, many more dangers and vulnerabilities around it. So I wanted to ask specifically about those two things, about the early help and support for families that has been eroded and what the government's plans are to put more of that in place. And then secondly, for that cohort of teenagers who are being removed from their families because of threats outside the home, what's the government doing to prevent that flow of young people into the care system?
So the early intervention work is very key. It's very key to our whole system approach, really, in terms of how we feel that we can make fundamental changes to children coming into care. It's very much about making sure that we have the support systems and mechanisms in place early. And that will be done through the family hubs types of structures, and making sure that we have this more joined up support that's available for young children because of early years, but also other children that may be coming into the system. So the way in which the reforms taking place is that we recognise that early help is absolutely needed. So the focus, and we're putting quite a bit of support and funding into the early prevention work that needs to take place. So we're legislating for that.
Sorry, Minister, how are you legislating for that in the bill? It's not clear to me.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, in terms of making sure that we've got sort of like the early help, the intervention, the family hubs, that is part of, making sure that...
It's not in the bill.
I'm going to pass on to Fran for a moment to help clarify while I just look for some information.
So the family group decision making is in the bill, which we think is a really important mechanism to ensure that all families at risk of having a child taken into care have that broad meeting with a broader community and family to help prevent them from coming into care. So that's a key element of the bill, and there's really strong evidence that will reduce the numbers of children coming into care, including of teenagers who are at risk of that extra-familial harm that the chair was referring to there. And then I guess the other the other element alongside the family hubs that the Minister was talking about is the doubling of direct investment in preventative services. So that isn't in the bill, as you've said, but it is a ring-fenced pot of money so that local authorities have to spend it on that preventative activity. And you're absolutely right that over the last 10 years, we estimate over 900 million of funding has been taken away from preventative activity because it's been needed at the statutory end of the system. And so we've seen this ballooning of expenditure and activity in the looked after children's system and a real hollowing out, which means that when families are at risk of a teenager going into care, perhaps through a risk of being exploited in a gang or whatever, the support services to prevent that from happening aren't there. And that's what our reforms are seeking to address.
Yeah. I think the reforms are also seeking to, through the family group decision making, to look at other provisions for children as well. So making sure that the support is there for the family, and that is looking at the provision of kinship care as well, and where maybe interventions are needed to support the families through that.
Thank you. So we heard in our evidence session on the bill some concerns about the risk of perpetrators of domestic abuse being involved in family group decision making, recognising that those individuals can often be quite manipulative and there can often be really distressing power dynamics within families in those circumstances. Do you believe that the proposals set out in the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill contain adequate safeguards against that risk?
There is guidance for local authorities around family group decision making. There will also be training for professionals in terms of how that's carried out, and that information will be available and present. It's very important that family group decision making is a safe place for the families and around the decisions that are made for the child or the children. It's very important that that community of that conversation is really reducing elements of significant harm and risk. So I think there are provisions there which will endeavour to make sure that is that safe conversation. Members will know that I have previously been a children family social worker, and in my days, which was quite a while ago I must say, where I have held family meetings, there's a level of, it's an entire process where it needs to have consent from the family itself as to who needs to be engaged and be part of those meetings, and to deal with potential conflicts or where there is that domestic abuse or domestic violence or threats from abuse between the relationships with the parents. So that needs to be done in a sensitive way, but it's not that these things can't be managed. The guidance is there to help how to manage those conversations, and that is very key.
Will you take forward our recommendation in our report to the government on the bill that local authorities should take advice from specialist domestic abuse charities when considering family group decision making? It's recognising that there is obviously a degree of professional training across all of those working in local authorities, but understanding domestic abuse in detail and the characteristics of it is a specialist area, and additional training and expertise might be required in those circumstances.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of the additional expertise. You need to have the right people in the room that have the right expertise and knowledge and experience of how to deal with these types of complex situations that it can be very scary and very frightening. So I think it's absolutely right in terms of making sure the right professionals are there and are prevalent, and those conversations and discussions take place. And I'm happy to have a look at it, to review it.
Thank you very much. So we'll go to Amanda now.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to ask about areas of out of area placement. So research and in real life, we've seen experiences from Become that have found children are at a greater risk. So 45% of looked after children are placed outside their local authority, with 22 placed more than 20 miles from their home. And as I've just said, Become, which has done some research, which has found that they're at greater risk of low being, emotional difficulties, disappearing from their core provider, and also increased risk of sexual and criminal exploitation. One care experienced person described experiencing racism for the first time when she was placed in an area that was very different to the demographic of our actual home, while another had to get up at 4 a.m. to get to school. What's the department doing to address this?
Thank you very much for your question. We need to keep children as safe to their local areas as possible. And within 20 miles is absolutely our aim, and which you've quite rightly mentioned. There are some really small number of cases, but there will be some where it's within the child's interest to be placed outside of the 20 miles, and that could be due to exploitation or gangs, or just making sure that we're keeping them safe. But on a whole, we, as you've quite rightly pointed, we have seen a huge increase. And you've already mentioned the experiences of the young people. And I too met with Become and met with some young people, probably the same campaign group actually, because I remember that experience that you said. We have a problem with the location of placements, and local authorities have really struggled to place children in foster provision or in children's homes provisions within their areas. So we have a real capacity issue that as a government we really recognise that we need to work on. We need to work on building our capacity with foster carers, within children's homes and so on. We have a whole recruitment, we recognise we need to do a big recruitment drive, and we're looking at fostering hubs, local authorities working more together to look at recruitment all the way through to retaining foster carers. So as we build capacity, we absolutely recognise there'd be more flexibility to give children the choices, to give social workers the choices they're making that they need. But we also need to build capacity with our children's homes as well, and we do have some capital money to be able to build homes as well. The issue with placing children outside of the 20 miles should not be happening. We recognise how serious this is. We recognise how it affects their mental health, their well-being, their education, their communications, their socialising, and how this can be quite frightening for them. And it's awful to hear about racism or discrimination or any experience. So we're fully aware of this. We do have an agenda to tackle this. We want to do it, and we're committed to it.
Thank you.
Did you want to add anything?
I guess just to add a couple of points is that alongside the boosting of the supply, which the Minister's referred to, a core part of the strategy to reform children's social care is to reduce the number of children coming into care in the first place. So there's a supply and a demand issue, and the strategy through the bill and the investment is acting on both of those points. And we especially see that often the children that are placed further from home are the children that perhaps have more complex needs, so they're really in a crisis, and the local authority is not well placed and doesn't succeed in commissioning an adequate placement for them that's closer to home. And so that's why our capital investment that the Minister referred to is particularly focused on trying to secure placements for those children. So that's both in the secure children's home system, where there are acute shortages geographically. Again, the Minister talked about the location of these placements not being helpful. So there's a real lack in London, there's a lack in the West Midlands, and we're looking to build new secure children's homes in both those locations. But also for children who perhaps won't ever get into a secure children's home placement, they often end up in bespoke sort of spot purchased placements at great cost that are often also far from home. And so again, we've got capital investment seeking to deliver a new type of provision for them that's in the children's wellbeing bill as well.
Thank you. That leads me on to actually quite nicely to two other questions. Firstly, you mentioned, both of you, various initiatives, boosting supply, reducing in care, bespoke placements. Do you think we need a national sufficiency strategy for children's social care?
What we do need is that we need to make sure that what we're doing, that it delivers, basically. We have regional cooperatives, and that will be where there would be a regional way of working to be able to assess and analyse what's happening around the whole recruitment of foster carers, where we need to recruit foster carers, where we need to do our advertising. It will look at a data analysis. It will look at the types of complexities around children's situations to make sure we're able to identify where those placements and homes are needed, as well as making sure that we have value for money. So it will be, where local authorities are really pressed in terms of spot purchases and having to pay exorbitant costs, it will look at some bulk purchases and also this is of children's homes or of placements. So it's about making sure that all of our strategies come together and they tie up and they absolutely deliver, and we're committed to that because we recognise that children need homes and they need good quality homes, and they need to make sure they're getting the best care and provision that we can provide. And at the moment we're not doing very well, and we need to do much better.
Thank you. And my last question, you've said you've met with children in the system. You've also met with different research companies. Do you intend to start collecting data on the proportion of children who are placed out of area?
There are data that we need to do better, and that is recognised. And I've been raising that since being in government as well, in terms of data to do with protected characteristics and so on. So that absolutely needs to be done better. There is a challenge for local authorities in terms of, not all of them, but for some local authorities, data collection. There are some local authorities that are looking at different ways of collecting data, and I have been able to meet with those local authorities to look at their initiatives and the ways they're doing it, and looking at how they can share best practice as well, and how they can improve and move forward. So yes, it very much is an area that needs more of a focus. And I think as we move forward with these reforms and the reforms requirements, then I think that I believe these systems will be better put in place to make sure that data is needed that needs to be collected.
I guess from that point of view, it's good to share good practice, but if we're collecting data in different ways, it's not going to be comparable, is it?
Sure.
So that was kind of why the question was, if we're as a government collecting that data and then looking at what the issues were of just different local authorities and then using best practice, it would mean we'd have a national set of data as opposed to from each local authority, which is then not really comparable.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, which is why it needs a level of focus so it is comparable.
Can I just ask before I pass to Darren, specifically about the cohort of young people who are placed out of area because the decision's been taken that it's in their own interests for that to happen? Does the government plan to collect data specifically on that cohort? Because I think there's obviously a set of judgments that apply in individual cases on why it's considered to be in a child's best interests, and there might be a difference, for example, between it being in their immediate best interest to move them to a place of safety and in their wider best interests to sever all connections with family and friends. And that we did have a very distressing case in my constituency, for example, of somebody who was placed out of area in exactly that way, who then returned to the area and committed a very serious crime against another young person. So there's a kind of question about that, and it's not clear that the government's data collection is adequate at present. I'm going to pass on to Fran, but before I do, I just want to say that when children are placed out of borough and if they're being moved back in, there does need to be a period of how is that going to work and the whole reunification of that. And so the case I was talking about was somebody who just returned off their own volition from their out of area placement. They came back to the area. It just didn't serve the purpose of keeping them safe. That was the intention, but that wasn't what happened in practice.
So thank you. So we do have data on out-of-area placements. So I've got a pretty detailed table here that breaks down the types of placements. So and the fact that I think the question might have alluded to the fact that the proportion of children placed out of area has increased. So my data suggests that it was 17% in 2014 over 20 miles from home and 22% in 2024. So it's going in the wrong direction. And we've then also got data on kind of which placements those are, whether they're foster placements. I think place for adoption is a different thing. So if you're being adopted and sort of starting a new life with a new family, I think that's less of a concern probably to be moving community than if you're sort of perhaps in a short-term placement, as the chair was alluding to there. I guess I feel as if it's quite complex to really understand the specific context of an individual child and what might be in a short-term sort of emergency best interests versus a long-term kind of new start type move. And so I'm not sure data is always the best way of getting under the skin of that and understanding that, but I guess within the department we do monitor out-of-area placements, and as the Minister said very strongly, we really are concerned about it, and that's why the whole strategic direction is seeking to reduce this. So I don't think the data is the problem. I think it's too many children in care and not enough placements are the two problems, and we're acting very strongly on both of those things.
Thank you. Go to Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Minister. Both from our side and your side, we've referenced the very important independent review of children's social care that was done. And obviously one of the conclusions of that was that an additional 2.6 billion needed to be spent over a 4-year period in order to actually get the outcomes that it was recommending. Is that a position you agree with, the conclusion of the report?
So thank you for raising that. We've seen in the autumn budget, we've seen a real commitment from the government towards the reforms in children's social care, and it's going in the right direction, and there's some real big step changes in terms of the kinship allowance, in terms of the family help and child protection. There's some real big movers here in terms of moving forward. It does need investment for the changes to happen. We need to make sure that we're doing the preventative, the early intervention work to reduce the number of children coming into care. But we also need to deal with bringing down the number of children, well, same thing, children coming into care, and deal with the whole profiteering. And it will continue to take a level of investment, and we do have obviously other spending reviews coming up as well, but the government is committed to reforming children's social care. We know that we need to do it for the welfare of the child, but we also need to do it because of the impact the profiteering is having on local authorities. So we think we're moving in the right direction, but I suppose the other thing to say is that there is enough money in the system to do with children's social care. It's just how that funding and that money is being spent. So where you've got the high-end placements, like some placements will vary for children, but if they're in like a private fostering or a private children's home, it could be £10,000 a week up to £63,000 a week. Now they're huge rates of finance that's being spent. If we can bring that down, which is our absolute intention, that we have to do that, and we're going to do that by the measures that we're taking, as we bring that back down and as we invest at the same time in children's social care, we should start to see a levelling out.
Thank you. And I recognise and very much welcome the additional money that has been promised. But just for clarity, you're saying we're moving in the right direction. Are you moving specifically towards a 2.6 billion spend on the things that the review recommended? Or are you saying, as I think, if I've understood rightly, that you intend to change what things are being spent on to ensure that those things which are more expensive and reactive, you are able to spend that money? Just for clarity,
Yes.
Are we moving in the right direction towards 2.6 billion, or are we moving in the direction towards an otherwise undefined amount of money at the moment?
I suppose the other thing that in response is that we are in a very difficult fiscal financial position as a government. We are seeing investment from the government towards children's social care, the reform work that's taking place. It's difficult to be able to predict how Treasury will continue to fund and support this, but we know there is from this government actually a strong will to do that. And I'm just going to pass to Fran as well.
Can I, sure. Before we do that, can I just ask both of you, what and particularly you, Minister, what's your assessment as the Minister responsible for this area of policy for delivering for children on the amount of additional money that's needed compared with the amount of money that you might be able to claw back by spending existing expenditure more effectively? So there is obviously, there's a pressure about the wider fiscal situation, but within that, what's your assessment of what's necessary to do this job to the level that's required?
Yeah. So, in terms of my perspective on all of this, what's really necessary is making sure that we reach those families early on and that we get the support that they need and that the finance is there to be able to deliver that. So they do need the family help, the family hubs, that intervention. Those areas do need to be rolled out and they do need to be stronger and further, as well as the support for kinship carers, which is why we are doing the pilot to see how that works. So that funding is quite crucial because that's very much part of the alternative to coming into care, but also that's what's best for the child to remain within their networks. Within
You
their
must
community.
have an overall assessment, having had 8 months to look at everything that's going on within this area of policy. You must have an overall assessment of where we're at relative to where we need to be and the quantum of money that you will need for the department to be able to get there. And I would be grateful for a bit more detail on that analysis.
So obviously lots of those discussions are taking place and they are spending review, negotiations and conversations, and they aren't necessarily things that an area that I can share in this select committee meeting. But as things go forward, then absolutely yes, we will be able to share the outcomes of those negotiation conversations.
I just wonder if I could come in on the question about the care review in particular, because I was working in this role at that point. And I guess the first thing to say is that quite a lot of time has passed since Josh McAllister's calculation of 2.6 billion. So we're obviously, as the Minister says, updating our assessment of the funding need, and we will have new figures that, as the Minister says, we'll be able to share post the care review, post the spending review, sorry. But we have doubled direct investment in preventative services to over £500 million starting from next month. So starting, for 25-26, that's really, really significant investment in that preventative activity to keep families together. And I guess in terms of strategically, what the reforms are intending to do is to flip the profile of spend. And this is what the Minister was referring to before about the quantum of funding in the children's social care system post-reform is probably about the right quantum, but it's being spent on the wrong things. And so, as the McAllister review articulated very strongly, there needs to be a period of double running then, so you can't turn off the acute activity because those families and children are in crisis and they need that support to continue until they can de-escalate or go back home or whatever the outcome is, or they become a care leaver. But for a period you need that double running, but the preventative activity should significantly reduce the number of children coming into care so that over time you can change the way the graphs look at the moment, which is completely skewed.
I mean, that's true, and I've been responsible for doing that in local government, and you're absolutely right. You cannot stop reacting while you are embedding the foundations of preventative work. Is it your view that the Treasury is hearing that? Because that double running period will have to go, and therefore we need to ensure that they get that it's not simply about just reducing it now, because that just will not happen. That is just plain evidence. So is it your view that the DFE is sufficiently making those representations to Treasury as part of the comprehensive spending review?
I absolutely feel the Treasury are hearing and listening to do with children's social care reform. Absolutely.
And alongside the Department for Education advocating strongly for this, I just wanted to refer to the fact that the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government is similarly advocating for investment in children's social care, because it's a shared issue. Essentially, it's causing major financial difficulties for local government, so it's a shared whole government agenda.
And we'll have detail on the result of those discussions when, roughly?
So obviously we have a spending review process coming up, but I should think June.
June.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to bring Jess in for a short supplemental and then we'll come back to you.
Obviously, any increase in preventative funding is very much appreciated, but the McAllister review is now a number of years old, so if anything, the estimates of the 2.6 billion will have increased, not least because the number of children in care at crisis has been increasing during that time, and the number of children coming into the care system has been increasing. At the same time, there hasn't been a universal rollout of family hubs, so the kind of universality of preventative work isn't in place. It's quite difficult to understand how you can replace the incoming flow into the care system without a very significant amount of investment in prevention, which is why, quite rightly, you say that there needs to be double running. And it just feels as though that independent reviews, which is incredibly sort of expansive, came out with quite a big figure, but one that most people recognise as what was needed. That now seems to have just completely disappeared, and somehow we can use the money that's currently in the system to do both double running and early intervention and look after children in crisis. None of that seems to add up to me.
No, so just to clarify, I'm not saying there's enough money in the system to do all of that now. Not at all. No, not at all. My point is that as we do the reform work that's taking place, we should begin to see the profiteering come down, because we're building our foster care base, we're building our children's home base, we're building our secure home base. We're working on with families early on through family group decision making. We're widening our kinship involvement with families, making sure that we get in early to look at ways in which we can prevent children from coming into care but staying in safe havens. So there's going to be a time where both of these spends, which is now absolutely taking place, absolutely needed. We feel that we're going in the right direction in terms of this, and in terms of a Treasury listening to where the investment is absolutely needed.
I've got Caroline just coming in supplemental on that.
Thank you. Just a supplementary to the question, you've been talking about other departments, in particular MHCLG. I wanted to ask you a question about health. I'm a children's doctor, as you may know, and I find it frustrating, and I know many of my colleagues find it frustrating, how frequently health is not listened to in the context of child protection. So what are you doing in your department, and what work have you been doing with the Department of Health and Social Care to ensure that health is not excluded from the various strategy and other meetings relating to children's well-being, and that health professionals are not ignored by social care when they raise concerns?
So health are a crucial part of children's social care, and work closely with the Department for Education. It's a huge part, really, of the working relationship, and very much in terms of the corporate parenting. It already has a significant role to play in terms of children's social care, and that was put in the Children and Social Work Act 2017. But going forward, the health will continue to be part of the corporate parenting. What we do recognise is that we need more provision for children in terms of CAM support, in terms of health visitors, midwives, because of the shortage of staff and the crisis there. But health are around the table in children's LAC reviews, they're around the table in child protection, and they continue to be absolutely significant, and I don't think we could ensure that we are caring for a child within children's social care if health aren't there and aren't participating as they should.
But Minister, they're often not, because it's not uncommon for a strategy meeting to be called without the medical professionals being given due time and awareness of when that meeting is going to be. It's not uncommon for social care to have concerns raised on a child protection basis by doctors, by nurses, and them to not be properly listened to. So what are you going to do to make sure that the ideal which you describe is actually the reality of the experience?
Well, the areas that you suggested and what you said, then it's something where we need to strengthen, and I'm happy to go away and have a look at that and to see what's happening in those areas.
Thank you, Minister.
Thanks. Darren.
Thank you. So on both outcomes and the cost of achieving those outcomes, you have mentioned the measures that are taking place to reform the social care market, you mentioned kind of bringing down profiteering and so on, and other measures. How are you going to be monitoring and reviewing that and making sure that the impact we need to see actually happens after the Act comes into force?
I'm going to pass that one to you.
So a range of different provisions in the bill will come into force at different points. We will monitor implementation of them. There's obviously a need for investment, as the committee's been asking about too. So I guess there's a question of the combined impact of the legislative change and the investment, and the government will decide sort of how they would like to report to the committee on that and report to the House and inform the public and the children and young people that have inputted into the reforms so far. So we will keep implementation under active review.
Okay, that's how you're going to report. How are you going to monitor it? I accept that it's going to be phased, but what's going to go into that in terms of resource? What are you going to be asking from partners to help you come to that conclusion as to whether these measures are working successfully or not?
So I mentioned the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government earlier. We're working with them on their local government outcomes framework, so the intention is for more funding for local government to be pooled into sort of larger pots that give more local discretion on for what they're spent on. So we've just removed the payment by results requirements alongside supporting families. So the point is for local authorities to employ more people doing the doing and helping families rather than the auditing and sort of reporting back and small applications for individual grants and so on. But alongside that, clearly then there's a need to collect the right data to be able to assure ourselves that the money is being spent on the right things and on the right evidence-based activities so that we get the return on investment that has secured the investment to begin with. And so we've set out towards the end of the last government a new outcomes framework, the national framework for children's social care that sets the strategic direction for the system, and we'll be collecting data under that and as part of the local government outcomes framework so that we can really sort of hold the system to account and assess whether any further reforms or interventions are needed to ensure that we're getting best value for money.
So have you yet decided what those things are, what data you are going to need at what point?
So that is in development, and it's obviously part of the broader sort of missions approach of governance that is continuing to evolve.
When do you expect to be able to give the first update on the impact? When do you expect there to be something at least substantive enough to comment on and give some initial findings?
So I think it would be post-spending review, but we'd be happy to come back to the committee with a date.
Let's take that away,
okay,
and then come back, because obviously we're very much focused on the reform itself and how that works with the local authorities and embedding that. But you're absolutely right on asking the question on monitoring, evaluating and data. So let's take that away and then come back to you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. And on one of the specifics of the reform around regional care cooperatives, what evidence have you seen so far from the current pilots that these are a successful measure?
So the pilots have a really strong evidence base, and we've already. I mean, I visited York, and I've also visited Wolverhampton local authorities, and I was just really excited to see a lot of the development that had taken place in those two areas. Especially in York, where they didn't have any agency social workers, which was quite outstanding, and they were really moving forward in terms of what they offer care leavers, was extremely impressive. In Wolverhampton, it was great in terms of the family hubs and how they'd expanded that and had really developed that. It's been quite very innovative in the way in which they were working with families, and there was something about the way in which the regions work and they're working closely together was just very rewarding to see. I'm going to let Fran tell you a bit more about how those regional care cooperatives are working.
Thank you, Minister. So So as the Minister says, we've got significant different elements of reform as part of the overall strategic direction. So in terms of regional care cooperatives, there are two pilots, one in Greater Manchester and one in the South East region, and we don't have evidence from those yet. The evidence that we do have on kind of innovative working and the fostering hubs and so on is looking very, very promising. But in terms of that regional commissioning footprint, it's very much at the early stages of sort of agreeing how they're going to work together and how that's going to solve the problems of poor commissioning and poor outcomes and poor value for money. So we've commissioned an evaluation partner to assess how that's working over a 5-year period, and we'll be looking at the results of that and determining how to implement the provision in the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which obviously allows the Secretary of State to direct local authorities to work together on a regional footprint. But we'll be sort of watching how the pathfinders go before we look to use that power.
There are clear benefits coming through, and we look forward to seeing more evidence of those. Are you alive to some of the challenges around how you define the region? Some of the evidence that the committee's heard took at a supposedly sensible region, but then noted that actually parts of it would work with its northern neighbours, some more with its western neighbours. The demographics were quite different that they were dealing with. So are you alive to those challenges, and how do you intend to kind of ensure that those defined regions get the benefits that you're seeking the RCCs to get?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important that the regions work and they're as effective as possible because of what they're driving forward. The department is working with the local authorities, and officers are working and having those conversations and that communication with the regions to analyse and evaluate how best those regions can be put together and how they function well together. But we do encourage the authorities within those regions to have conversations themselves as well about how this is working and will work.
So just to drill down a tiny bit on that point, so the specific example that we heard from was Kent, where the regional care cooperative covers Kent and South East England, including as far as Hampshire, but parts of Kent relate very, very directly to London, and there is a significant challenge around the number of out-of-area placements from London local authorities going into Kent, and they were just raising some concerns about how you get to a sensible geography, and I think that is a problem that you're likely to find replicated in many parts of the country just because of the very nature of drawing boundaries. So we just wanted to know a bit more about what your process is for reconciling some of those challenges.
Yeah, shall I let you take this one?
So we've worked very closely with Kent over recent years, particularly in relation to their challenges of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and some of the real difficulties that they've got in providing placements for them and participating in the National Transfer Scheme to disperse asylum-seeking children around the country. And so we really know some of the challenges that Kent face in terms of placement capacity. I guess the challenge is in terms of brokering a sort of a regional footprint, you have to draw a line somewhere, and I think for Kent to be part of a London footprint probably wouldn't work either. So there's sort of risks and disbenefits of almost any footprint I think you could come up with, and I guess it's about how we and the regional care cooperative themselves sort of navigate some of those challenges and gaps, and some of that's about relationships and partnership working that goes kind of beyond the scope of the RCC. And I guess the department has deliberately chosen two very different regional footprints to sort of test this. So, the very urban and sort of well-established relationships of Greater Manchester versus a really broad geography in the southeast with a lot of counties and so on. So we'll be watching those and seeing how they work and what tweaks might be needed in terms of rolling it out more widely. And we'll be particularly thinking about the Kent example in that.
Thank you very much. Amanda.
Thank you. The bill gives the Secretary of State the power to introduce a profit cap on non-local authority providers if the other measures have not had an impact. How and when will you assess whether this is necessary?
Yeah, it's a very key point really. We want the IFAs and the private children's homes to really take heed and to respond appropriately as we feel they should, because the profiteering is, is beggars belief really, in terms of 20 to sometimes 30%. We can call in these private organisations to be transparent with their accounts, and we are developing and building a scheme within the department to be able to really scrutinise and analyse what's happening within these IFAs and private companies. And if obviously there is a situation where they are not responding, not being appropriate, then the Secretary of State has already determined she will take a strong line on not not accepting this, and therefore putting in a profit cap.
So there's a scheme being drawn up so that it's a fair process, because what we wouldn't want is
absolutely.
One provider and then another.
I mean, in saying that, I do also want to acknowledge that many IFAs and private children's homes, they do good work, and they do provide care for children, and good quality care. But we will not tolerate the profiteering that's taking place. But yes, absolutely a fair and process and transparent process.
Okay. So obviously there's been concerns around the implementation of a profit cap with regards to restricting the supply of children's homes. So how will we mitigate the risk of implementing the profit cap, including the risk of restricting the supply of homes, places, and the possibility of larger companies being able to avoid a cap?
So we recognise that there may be some ways in which some companies will try to try and, I'm trying to think of the right word, to hide or avoid, so that therefore they don't incur or a profit cap or come under it. So we are analysing all of this and looking at how we make sure that everything is transparent and open and not hidden really. So therefore then, as I've already said, that we will act in a way in which we will do everything we can to identify where there are issues, to be able then to make sure that we pull on that cap. But at the same time, we don't want to scare the market. We want places to still be available and on offer for children, and for the provisions still to be maintained, and to be maintained to a very high standard.
Thank you. Transparency and fairness have been really key in your answers there, but introducing a profit cap by regulation would reduce the detailed parliamentary scrutiny of the proposals. Will you commit to consulting this committee on any draft regulations before they're laid before Parliament?
What I can do is, as we work on this and as we're building the capacity ourselves and firming up our lines and our lines of review, I'm happy to share that with this committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So we have heard that there is a crisis in recruitment and retention of foster carers because of the inadequacy of financial support, lack of value and respect for the role. Will you increase the financial support available to foster carers to help them stay in the role? So
foster carers they're like gold dust. They absolutely do a great job with caring for children, bringing children into their life and into their home. And we absolutely value the experience, the care, the love that foster carers provide to children. And I believe that foster carers' rates were increased, and were increased above inflation, the last increase. And we will continue to make sure that they are valued and they are supported, and we recognise the need to support them financially, which is why there is a foster care payment and a foster care allowance as well. Fran, do you want to come?
Thank you. Yeah, just to add the data there. So for 2024-25, the national minimum allowance increased by 6.88%. So that's above inflation. And there were also tax and benefit allowance changes that we estimate will give the average foster carer an additional £450 per year, as well as simplifying the process for self-assessment for foster carers. But I guess, as the Minister said, we're especially keen to have people come into fostering because they want to care for children rather than for a financial benefit. So they need to be appropriately remunerated so that they can do that role effectively. But it isn't all about pay, and the evidence suggests that that isn't the predominant cause of shortages of foster carers.
Thank you. Yes, so will you introduce a national fostering strategy alongside the strategies on adoption and kinship care to show how the role is valued and fundamental to our social care system?
Well, we absolutely value foster carers, and we absolutely feel that, that foster carers have the support from their local authorities, have the support and encouragement from government as well. It's a space where we recognise that we need to do more, and it's a space where we're always reviewing it as well. In terms of rolling out the fostering hubs, we recognise that we need to recruit more foster carers, but also retain them, and we need to make sure that that support continues to be of really good quality. And foster carers do receive already some excellent support in terms of support groups and training and ongoing supervision from their fostering social workers. But in terms of having a national strategy, it's something that we can keep reviewing.
Okay, thank you. And we had evidence from young people who came to speak to us about the profound and often negative impact of being separated from their siblings in foster care. How will you improve support to allow siblings to remain in contact?
Sibling contact is extremely important, and there should already be that way in which local authorities are working when they're placing children. Siblings should always be placed together, basically, and local authorities have that responsibility to place siblings together unless there is a significant reason why that should not happen. But I recognise that they are not often, but sometimes placed in separate placements, and that contact needs to be protected and it needs to happen. And I also recognise that sometimes the contact is more focused on the child having contact with their parent or parents rather than that sibling contact. It is something that I'm aware of, and it is something that needs to happen with local authorities, and especially, I suppose, where the children are placed outside of the 20 miles, it makes it more difficult and more challenging. But we as a government are determined for children to build capacity and for children to be placed within that 20 mile. But in terms of the analysis that needs to take place, two of our regional care cooperatives, the analysis will be around building that foster care base so that foster carers are able to take more sibling placements. But it's absolutely crucial that siblings remain in contact with each other and that contact is encouraged and does take place. And that's also where they're placed in children's homes as well.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have data on the extent of sibling separation in foster placements?
No, we don't.
Might
we
it
don't
not
have
be?
data on that, but it's a good thing to raise.
Yeah.
And actually, it's something that we can gain from local authorities,
Yeah.
because that is quite crucial.
You're not going to fix the problem if you don't understand the extent of it and the reasons why it's happening.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
And the other thing that I'd add on sibling placements is obviously we are in a housing crisis at the moment, and the kind of lack of space in foster care homes of an adequate size for children to be placed in sibling groups, particularly for larger sibling groups, is obviously kind of one of the constraints in the system at the moment. So I'd be interested in the extent to which you're working with MHCLG around housing policy, for foster carers to make sure that I mean, it is good to hear you say, Minister, that children should be placed in sibling groups. That the reality and the evidence that we've heard is that really isn't happening to the extent that it should be, and that it's profoundly harmful for children. So, the lack of data on this, we can't just say we want it to happen without looking in detail at what the specific fixes might be to enable it to happen more.
It's a huge concern, and it's good that you've raised it, and it is something that needs attention. We do have cross-departmental ministerial meetings. It has already come up to do with the size of people's homes, temporary accommodation, movement, and also I think there is some priorities for some local authorities to do with foster carers and needing to increase their homes. But I'm going to pass on to Fran in a moment just to make sure I've got that information absolutely right. There was also a scheme about that it was piloted around some local authorities where they would also extend foster carers' homes to enable more children to be placed or siblings to be placed. So there are things that we can look at, there are things that we can work on, but I absolutely agree that we need to start with collecting the data so we understand the issue and the problem. I'm going to pass on to Fran.
Thank you. I guess I heard the testimony of, I think it was Lamar, talking about being separated from her siblings and the sort of long-standing impact of that on her relationships, and that's incredibly distressing. I guess the first thing to say is that helping families to stay together, I think, is the best way to help children to maintain their sibling relationships. So the provision in the bill around family group decision making and actually harnessing the strengths and the opportunities within the broader family group can hopefully ensure that fewer children are taken away from their immediate family and lose that sort of natural sibling relationship. So I guess investment in that from the government, and then in the kinship allowance that we're piloting, and just enabling more families to kind of keep their children together, I think is the best way that we can help support sibling relationships. Clearly then when children do go into care, as the Minister said, sometimes placements, they should prioritise keeping sibling groups together, but we know that all too often that is difficult. The scheme that the Minister was referring to, I think, is called Room Makers, which allows local authorities to fund some housing extensions so that a foster care family can take a bigger sibling group than they might otherwise be able to. So that's something we're interested in pursuing further, and the fostering hubs that the Minister's talked about help to sort of provide support to foster care families who might take a large group of children, and that might be quite a challenging thing for them to do. In terms of the data, I think, as the Minister said, we'll have to look at it because, again, I think data can be very helpful, but there's such a variety of different situations applying to all of these different families that I don't think it's immediately obvious what that data would be, and we'd have to be careful not to sort of overburden the system with trying to count things that actually are quite individualised. But I think we should certainly look at it, because I think you're right that having visibility of it is the first point in trying to work to address it.
Thank you. Amanda.
Thanks, and I get to talk about another fantastic group of people, which is kinship carers. It's mentioned a number of times, and it's something really close to my own heart because there's a great set of people in my city working with children in kinship care. First one is just a straight question. When will the kinship allowance pilot be rolled out, and who will be eligible?
So, thank you for the question. Also acknowledge the great work that kinship carers are doing, and that they are very good at coming together to support each other as well. The department obviously offers the peer-to-peer support and some mentoring support as well through family rights groups. The pilot is what the department has been working on and been looking at the eligibility of it, how it will be rolled out, how we would make the decision on which local authority. Obviously, there is 40 million. It's to be set across 10 local authorities. Our focus will be on an expression of interest. We are looking to roll this out towards the autumn term, and as soon as we have more information and more detail, then obviously we will absolutely make that known.
Thank you. And just an additional one linked to that. We've heard calls to harmonise the patchwork of educational support so that support such as Pupil Premium Plus and priority admissions is available to children in all types of kinship care. Will the department be looking to do this?
We are looking at other areas and other ways in which we can support kinship carers, absolutely, and we are looking at the adoption and special guardianship funding to enable kinship carers, kinship children, to be able to benefit from that, and as well as the virtual school head as well. And I'm just going to pass on to Fran in case I missed anything.
I guess the only thing you've not mentioned is the new kinship ambassador. I don't know if you want to talk about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware of the new kinship ambassador. Okay, we have a new kinship ambassador called Daby. She is there to be able to focus on the policies with us around kinship care. She will also be working with local authorities, working with kinship carers, making sure there's consistency across local authorities, identifying where there's any policy gaps or areas. She's an ambassador to advocate for kinship carers. She's already been meeting with the kinship organisations, kinship carers from many parts of the country, and has already started identifying where she feels that the government needs to focus.
And how do we feed into her?
In terms of select committee?
Yeah.
You could invite her to come and speak to you. I'm sure she'd be delighted to do that. And I'm sure she will be able to just speak about the work that she's doing and the areas that she's focused on and how she's working with government as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And one final one from me. The Employment Rights Bill does not include any measures to strengthen employment rights for kinship carers, such as paid kinship leaves. Why is this, and do we intend to introduce this in the future?
So within the Department of Education, we do have kinship leave. And this is an area which we think is quite crucial. It is something that we are looking at, that we are focusing on, and I'm sure Fran can say a bit more about this.
Thank you. So, as the Minister said, the Department for Education has recently introduced kinship leave, and there are a number of private sector employers that the committee may be aware also offer kinship leave, so Card Factory, Tesco, John Lewis, and we think this is a really important way of sort of signalling an employer's support for kinship carers, who obviously do an absolutely crucial role in supporting children and keeping them within their sort of broader family networks. Just one other thing I wanted to mention is the provision in the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill that I'm sure the committee has seen around a kinship local offer, which won't harmonise at a national level but will allow kinship carers to see very easily what support is on offer in their local area, and we think that's an important step forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Caroline, briefly.
Can I just ask what kinship care provision you've made in terms of, is it a number of days or weeks, and what the cost is that to the department, and what estimate you've got of the cost of that to the country if it was rolled out across all employers?
So we can write to you with the exact calculation that went into that, but it was something that was agreed to by the executive committee, the board of the department. Essentially, we've got 7,500 people employed in the Department for Education. We've calculated, I don't have the numbers to hand, but we've calculated how many of those are likely to be kinship carers, and it was deemed an affordable sum to offer kinship leave to our employees.
Yeah, and just to say that when the carers become a kinship carer, it's a very minimal number of people when you think about the employment in which they're in. So it would have a very small impact on an organisation or employers itself. But we do recognise that kinship leave is something that's very important.
I suppose it depends on the size of the organisation that you're looking at, and the amount of you're expecting people to give, and the demographic of people which you employ. But I'd be interested if you could write to the committee with your understanding of that.
If kinship leave is a real benefit for kinship carers, and I'd agree that it is, and if it's possible to do it in an organisation like Department for Education and other private sector employers. Why has the government chosen not to legislate so that all kinship carers have the benefit of it?
I think we're at the first step, and we started within the department. And as in with what we're trying to do and what we've begun to do, where I feel that we've made a big splash with kinship carers, is that we're going to carry on reviewing and looking at what more needs to be done in this space to support kinship carers.
Okay. Let's go to Manuela.
Minister, the Children's Wellbeing and School Bills does not contain any measures relating to adoption. And this is despite evidence highlighting problems, including a shortage of adopters, lack of support for adopted children at school, difficulties accessing funding, long waiting lists for children to be adopted, especially children in sibling groups and those with special needs. Was this a missed opportunity?
There is, I mean, you know, we've come into government and we have inherited this situation to do with that you've outlined, where there are areas of focus and areas of need, and I believe that these areas can be addressed. And I've met with Adoption England. We fund Adoption England as well, and they recognise the areas where we have suggested where they need to act and respond, and that is on the prospective adopters recruiting and looking at how we can recruit more prospective adopters, how we can do that to make sure that we recruit prospective adopters that could take a sibling group, and also children from diverse backgrounds as well, which you have mentioned. We also recognise they recognise that, and they actually have a Black Adopters Project as well, and I met with them and I spoke at their event. But it is an area which is close to my heart, and I recognise that more needs to be done in this space, and I'm determined that absolutely does happen. Also recognise where there needs to be more done within the schools and where that support needs to happen. And I'm going to let Fran come in and see.
We recognise some of the challenges with accessing support through the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund that you alluded to there, but that is a approximately £50 million per annum fund that offers therapy and support to adoptive families. So it's a really, really significant financial investment from government that offers some brilliant therapy and helps those children to do well. And I guess in terms of legislation, I'm not sure what the legislative gap is. So as the Minister's sort of referred to, we know that certain groups wait longer to be adopted, and that is problematic. But I don't think there's a legislative answer to that. It's about kind of outreach and, reaching the people who could be successful adoptive families. But I don't think legislation would solve that. But if the committee has a legislative gap that they're looking at, then obviously we'd be happy to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the adoption and special guardianship support fund, there is uncertainty around that at the moment, which is causing a lot of distress to adopters and their families. So, can you give reassurances to these families that you will continue with that and is?
I am aware of the uncertainty and the insecurity that is causing, because obviously the announcement hasn't been made. The announcement will be made very soon about the adoption and special guardianship funding, and as soon as that information is available, then it will be made known. But I absolutely understand, and I hear and I do get it, and I am hearing from organisations as well around this, and I'm doing everything I can to push this forward.
Thank you. And we also heard evidence that adopted children do not always receive the support they need at school. So will you review the educational support available to adopted children throughout, so from early years to throughout their educational journey, and improve the support when needed?
I have met with many adoption organisations, well, a few, not many, a few adoption organisations, and the issue around supporting school often comes up because of the early years trauma and teachers needing to recognise this and to make sure that the support and the understanding is there for the children in school. So I'm already looking at this as an area and looking to see what more we can do and where we need to offer support to the school, and also to ensure that the child gets the relevant support they need. Obviously, through the adoption and special guardianship funding, that money is used to support them. It could be used to support them in school, outside of school, but there is also the pupil premium plus as well that could also be used in school, but that would need to be made known so that that can be used. But there is more that needs to be done in this space, and I recognise that completely.
Okay, thank you, Minister.
Minister, in the autumn budget, the government committed £90 million to renovating and expanding the children's home estates. Obviously, really welcome investment, but particularly on the expansion, how many new places are you expecting that money to buy? And you're obviously going to need to staff those. How are you going to ensure that there is sufficient staff to look after the children in those homes?
Very good question. So we recognise we need to build more, and we are encouraging local authorities to do that, to identify spaces and places for open children's homes. We're looking at 200. And it would be the local authorities then that would identify those areas and then obviously make that known to the department, and they would be the ones that would be managing those homes. It would be their decision how they manage those homes and how they continue to facilitate them and to provide that service. In terms of secure placements, we recognise that, you know, if it's a London, if it's for example, a child in London, we don't have any secure children's homes in London, so already it isn't appropriate really. We need secure homes within London as well. So we are looking to build secure homes in London and in other regions, and we're looking for, if my memory serves me correct, 180 secure homes.
Okay, so it's 200 general homes and 180 homes. Now, obviously, it'll differ the demand from region to region, but overall, do you have data yet from those local authorities as to what their pressures are and how many places they need those 200 homes to provide? The
local authorities are very energised generally around this because they recognise they need children's homes, they need children's provisions. They are working with the department on that. We have had many local authorities that have already started to put forward their ideas and their bids and ways in which they can be innovative within their local areas. I'm going to pass to Fran to give some more detail on that in terms of the work with the department and the other local authorities.
Okay, thank you. So the 200, I just wanted to clarify, it's 200 places rather than 200 homes.
200 places. Okay.
And that's 90 million, as the Minister said. So the bidding round for that has recently closed. So the department is assessing the bids that we've received for that, and that's for local authorities to match fund. So they would put in half the funding, and the central government would put in the other half. And that's particularly for open children's homes, but for children with the more complex needs, which was the point I was referring to earlier, that these are the children that all too often are let down by the system and end up very far from home. And actually there's a really important health dimension to that as well, in terms of having therapeutic support to keep those children well and sort of de-escalate their needs. So that scheme is being assessed now, and we'll announce once we've worked through the bids who's been successful in that. And then the secure children's home placements, that's an additional 80 secure children's home placements in 2 new secure children's homes, so 1 in London and 1 in the West Midlands. And we're also investing in and refurbishing and rebuilding where needed some of the existing estate that is kind of degrading and at risk of going out of use.
What's roughly the split that you're expecting in terms of money for new builds and money for refurbs on existing estate?
In terms of the open children's homes, or in terms of the secure?
The overall 90 million pot, how much of that, how many millions do you expect to go to new, how many to refurb?
That the 90 should be all new provision.
That's
so
new.
Exactly, yeah. And in terms of, I guess your question was also about who will work there, how will they be staffed and so on. So the different local authorities will come forward with different proposals. So some of them, they'll run them in-house. Some of them, they might have a partnership with a voluntary sector organisation or a not-for-profit organisation. And so I guess that's all part of the overall strategy to diversify provision, but to make sure that new entrants to the system are there with the right motivation and with the right ethos in terms of caring for the child first and foremost, and not to profit.
And is any of the money announced for revenue for staffing costs, or is that expected to be absorbed into local authority?
It's all capital. That's all capital.
It's all
we've referred to there, yeah.
Okay. I mean, on the basis that, you know, we've heard worrying reports about unsuitable supported accommodation, then, you know, all new placements in much better accommodation is going to be welcome. But in terms of that unsuitable accommodation, and, you know, the evidence presented to this committee was about children living in hostels, B&Bs, barges, caravans, flat shares with people with substance abuse. You know, I think we would all agree these are utterly the wrong places for care leavers to be. So what impact has the Ofsted, the new regulatory framework that Ofsted is bringing in around children being placed in unsuitable accommodation, what's the impact of that so far?
So you're absolutely right in terms of what you've described, and what Ofsted has been tasked with is actually to register provisions which are unregistered, but not the provisions like the barges and the unsuitable, you know, those types of provisions we're talking about. If they're in a children's home that's not registered, they have been tasked with registering every provision so that we have no unregistered provision where children are being placed.
In which case, what more needs to be done to ensure that there is no chance of children ending up in the kinds of places that we've described, whether registered or not?
Sure. I mean, the local authorities are the ones that make the decision as to where they place children, and they find themselves in some obviously very difficult and tight situations. So obviously the task is for the local authority to make sure they have the right provision, they place children in the right provision from get-go, day one. And Ofsted absolutely need to make sure that they are inspecting those provisions to make sure they're suitable for children. I'm going to pass on to you.
Thank you. So the new supported accommodation regulations are still sort of bedding in. So the deadline for providers to register with Ofsted was the end of October 2023. So Ofsted are still going through, so they've received those registration applications, but they're still undertaking the inspections that flow from that, and there's a significant volume that they're working through. So it will take some time until all of that provision is entirely regulated and inspected. But I think that's a really important point, as the Minister said, to ensure that some of that very unsuitable provision that you've heard about is no longer tolerated. And then the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill has a power so that Ofsted can fine unregistered provision. So that sort of all settings that a child is placed in should be supervised and properly overseen by Ofsted so that we can be confident it's safe. But as the Minister said, it's the local authorities' role and statutory duty to secure an adequate placement, and national government is trying to help them to fulfil that duty, but it is their duty.
So just on that, you say that all new places that need inspections have been known about since September 23? October 23. So we're now 18 months later.
Yeah.
How many have been done? How many remain to be done? And when do you expect that to be completed?
So we've got all that data in the department. I haven't got it at my fingertips now, okay. But there were sort of more people applied and registered than we had expected. So it's a very, very significant proportion of the system overall. So I think it's around 7% of overall looked after children's placements are in supported accommodation settings. So it's a really significant volume that just takes some time to get through. But it's an important step to have some regulation, because until now there were far too many children in places that weren't regulated and registered.
And I think we would absolutely accept the points you make. The urgency of having a places for children to go which are safe and known to be safe is absolutely paramount importance. So I think we probably would want that reassurance of the data of how long you've got until you have inspected all of those, so that we can have some reassurance.
I'm going to bring Caroline in for a supplemental before I come back to you, Darren. At this point in our agenda, can I just encourage greater brevity of both questions and answers to help us to get through all the topics by 12 o'clock, if that's okay. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about children with severe disabilities who often need respite care provision, which they should be getting, and many are not getting, or not getting the number of days or hours they're supposed to be available to, leaving a huge strain on those families who can't just bring up a babysitter because of the profound needs that their child has. What work, Minister, are you doing with DHSC and MCLG to ensure that respite care is available, is of good quality, and that children do not end up in a situation where they end up being brought to hospital, essentially for care over weekends?
I think you raise a really good point, and even as a constituency MP myself, I've come up against these types of situations where there's a situation where respite is needed, but actually that respite placement has not been identified, and then that puts an additional strain and struggle on the family and unnecessary stress. So I think I think you're absolutely right. We do have challenges. I have to be very honest. There are challenges in foster placements. There are challenges in making sure that the provision is there, which is why it's so crucial that we just build our capacity and that we recruit foster carers that are able to manage a variety of caring responsibilities, and that being people with from children to complex needs to disabilities, and we need to make sure that happens. There are also obviously some there are private respites that can also be purchased by the local authorities, and that's why we need to make sure that with that purchasing capacity is done well, so the regional care cooperatives will have greater powers not powers, but responsibilities to really look at where the gaps are in terms of foster placements, and making sure that where there's special needs ones and complex needs ones, that we identify where that is, so that we can I'm trying to go quickly, you see, so that we can identify where those placements are needed, so that we can recruit those types of placements.
So, Minister, have you bid for more money specifically for respite care in the spending review? In terms of the money that's been put towards foster care, I believe there's been an uplift of around 11 million for fostering. I'm going to pass on to Fran with some of the details around the money, but there is have you asked for more?
Within the previous spending review, there has been some more money that's been put towards fostering, recruitment and retaining.
And the Families First for Children Pathfinder has working with families with disabled children, sort of embedded throughout the whole programme of that reform. So specialists, special educational needs and disability training, send qualified practitioners. The Working Together Guidance 2023 includes an emphasis on ensuring practitioners recognise the additional pressures and challenges that families face when they have children with a disability, and there's a designated social care officer to join up between the social care and SEND services. I guess I think at root of your question is that sometimes families can struggle to cope, and what support is available to them, and so rolling out these family help reforms nationally is an absolutely key plank of helping them to parent effectively and to cope through the adversity that they're facing.
It's about the lack of availability of respite care and the fact that it gets cancelled at short notice, which leaves people in a difficult situation.
Yeah. I can see that's difficult. I guess we're in a difficult point in the spending review where we're in negotiations with the Treasury, but we're obviously not able to share specifically kind of what we've requested before any sort of Treasury Minister decisions.
Darren.
Thank you. Two brief questions on social workers. We've heard evidence that there is a recruitment and retention problem, and obviously the turnover and the instability that results from that is bad for the children that social workers are there to serve. So are you intending to take any steps, and I appreciate the comments you've just made about the spending review, but will you be asking for the resource to be able to do things like either increase pay or increase student social work bursaries, for example, to help tackle the crisis?
We have lots of avenues in which somebody could be trained to become a qualified social worker, but we absolutely recognise that we need to recruit and retain social workers. But in the, we've recently had some very pleasing and encouraging statistics on social work, and in sharing that with you, we've had the highest number of family social workers in post that we've had for a very, very long time. It's at its highest, really, it's been up by 3.7%, which is very pleasing. We've also had a number of agency workers fall, so we've had less agency workers in place, and that's fallen down by 9.2%, which is down by 700 workers. So we are seeing things move in the right direction, and one of the things that I'm particularly encouraged about is that as social workers feel more valued in the work that they're doing and can feel that they're making a significant difference, I think that really does encourage workers to commit to become permanent, and also encourages more people to want to be part of something where they see they're making a significant difference. It is still a challenge, there is still more to do, but I feel it's moving in the right direction.
I mean, we would obviously welcome those good signs. You'll be, I assume, monitoring retention of those, because obviously having higher numbers is great.
Sure.
What we want to make sure is that they're staying in post. So do you have a plan for monitoring that and taking action if anything changes?
We do need to keep an eye on it, and we absolutely are. We're assessing it, we're reviewing it. We have Social Work England, we have BASWA, very keen players and organisations in this that want to make sure that we have the social workforce that we need and that we retain them, and that's crucial. And I think one of the things is that we've also seen is that caseloads have begun to go down as well on average. So all of those things are moving in the right direction. But you're absolutely right, retaining is key to make sure that we're not leaking. I think also for the reforms that we're doing, there's, I believe that social workers will feel that it's more rewarding, their contribution to what they can achieve through children's social care.
Thank you. And on that point about caseloads, almost half of social workers say they don't feel like they get enough time with the families that they're working with. So if caseloads are going down, what's that due to, or what more are you doing as a department to ensure that caseloads can come down for those for whom yet it hasn't?
So it works with some of the information we've already shared, that if we are reducing the number of children that come into care, then automatically the caseload will come down, because obviously a social worker has children as part of their caseload. So and if they've got 15 looked after children, then they've got 15 cases. But as we're working on the areas to do with family group decision making, more families moving into kinship provision, or children being supported to remain at home with support, then actually that will also help to make sure we're putting in the right provisions, the right support, enabling families, supporting them to be able to function and to manage well. Okay. Do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to add, just to support what the Minister was saying, that we have a national workload action group which has been set up to look at workload pressures so that social workers can do exactly the work that the Minister was referring to, that they really want to do to support and help families, rather than the sort of the assessing and the bureaucracy end of the profession. It's more about actually helping them to parent effectively. So we're seeking to sort of take away any obstacles to that through that group.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Thank you, Jess.
Thank you so much, Minister. Recognising we don't have huge amounts of time, I'm going to rattle through these. The Department's policy paper, Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive, makes no mention of any measures related to reunification, despite the NSPCC research finding that failed reunification costs £300 million each year. If you are looking to make savings within the current spending envelope, wouldn't it make sense to issue national guidance to local authorities on reunification?
So thank you for raising that. I recently met with a family rights group and I met with parents. Actually, it was very rewarding because they were able to explain to me about some of the contact they'd lost with their children and some where their children had returned home in a planned way, but actually the reunification planning didn't take place as it should, and it made it even more difficult for the young person and their experiences of parenting them. And it was actually a really, really difficult situation. So you're right, the reunification plan needs to work. Family group decision making, I believe, will be a process in where that can help. But family group decision making is before you get to court proceedings. But underneath that,
I was actually just talking about national guidance because that's lacking, and I think all of the research shows that local authorities really would like to do much more of this. But what they're lacking is the guidance nationally that would help them to do this consistently. So I think the case about it can really benefit children, can benefit parents. Not all reunification is right, and we have to make sure that it's not forced. But it's about that kind of guidance nationally that could help.
I was just going to say family meetings can take place as well. But in terms of the guidance, I mean, local authorities will obviously have some guidance, and national guidance is something that we can take away and have a discussion with DCEMs.
Okay, thank you. Just talking about care leavers, your own written evidence tells us what we know, which is care leavers have some of the worst long-term life outcomes in society. In our recent report into the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill, we highlighted the confusing patchwork of entitlements faced by care leavers, backed up by the amazing testimony from care leavers themselves. So, for example, some local authorities will offer free or subsidised bus travel for care leavers, but others will not. Will you look at introducing a national care offer to address this patchwork?
We recognise the post-work code type lottery for care leavers. We're committed to making sure care leavers have a good experience. You've already highlighted, we're aware of some of the awful situations that care leavers fall into because they don't have the support that they so crucially need. We do have a cross-departmental ministerial meeting that's meeting just on the area to do with care leavers, which is chaired by the Secretary of State for Department of Education and the Deputy Prime Minister. It is an area that we're focused on. All departments have been tasked with coming back with saying what they're doing in this space, and it is being followed through, and I do hope and I do believe something will be coming out of that. As soon as we have that, then that will be shared.
Okay, and then just quickly, some local authorities have made care experience protected characteristic voluntarily. Have you made any assessment of how this has made any real difference in discrimination against care leavers or any increase in their outcomes, and whether it should be put in place nationally?
Very pleased that local authorities are prioritising the needs of care leavers and are taking this very seriously. We need to reduce care leavers from having mental health issues, from being in NEET, and also from moving into criminality. So it's an area that local authorities recognise they have a responsibility, and they need to do that. And I believe 144 have made this a protected characteristic, so they recognise their responsibility in this area. Where we continue to work with local authorities and to support them in their strategies around care leavers, and we recognise there's absolutely more to do in this space.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, recently tabled amendments to the Children's Wellbeing Bill to extend corporate parenting responsibilities to government departments and other relevant bodies. But why does the corporate parenting extension exempt immigration and the adult criminal justice estate, given the key areas of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and the overrepresentation of care leavers in prison, particularly those from black backgrounds?
I didn't catch all of that question, I'm afraid. Could you?
I could repeat. So I think everyone is very pleased to see the corporate parenting responsibilities amendments introduced into the Children's Wellbeing Bill. But my understanding is that this corporate parenting extension exempts immigration and the adult criminal justice estate, given that obviously unaccompanied asylum-seeking children are an incredibly important part of the care system, and also that care leavers are overrepresented in the adult criminal justice system, particularly those from black backgrounds. Do you know why these exemptions have been made?
So I'm aware that all of the departments recognise their responsibility as corporate parents and are dedicated in this space. I believe I need to get back to you on this to give you some more information. I'm going to bring Fran in as well on this point.
And if you could answer, whether you could give us some information about the further guidance on this and how it will be implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously this was a new amendment that's only been tabled quite recently, and as the Minister suggested, we've been discussing this and agreeing this with government departments, across the whole government. So it's been quite a lot of work to secure that agreement, and clearly with any new legislative requirement, that always brings a sort of an element of risk in terms of how it will work and how it will interact with existing duties. And so in relation to immigration in particular, there is already statutory duties relating to children, for example in section 55 of the Border Citizenship and Immigration Act 2009, and essentially what we've been trying to do is to ensure that this new corporate parenting duty doesn't overtake or distract from or harm in any way the core functions of the bodies that it applies to. And so the list of bodies captured by the new clause, as it will be, is one that we can amend by regulation later on, and so it's a list that will be kept under review essentially as we see how it achieves its intended effect and any unintended effects that may result from it. So we'll keep a close eye on it, and we'll obviously issue guidance in terms of how it should operate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to talk about mental health. So the care experience young people we took evidence from in this inquiry made very helpful suggestion to improve mental health support for children and young people in care. And these included mandated mental health check-ins by social workers or teachers, fast-track access to COMS, and better trauma awareness among professionals. So I've got two questions. Will you consider taking these or any of these forward, of these recommendations? And also in our report, the committee concluded that there is scope to strengthen the requirement for the mental health and well-being of children and young people in care to be assessed. So what are your views on that, and will you take steps to address these?
Thank you. I mean, the government is committed to improving mental health support to children and to young people, and it's really critical in helping young people and children to achieve and to thrive throughout their life. There are challenges within the NHS, and there are challenges that they are addressing in those areas. When a child is first looked after, then actually their mental health, is assessed. They not by because I can see you nodding, disagreeing there, not necessarily by a mental health practitioner, but assessed in terms of whether they would need further support. There are still challenges with the CAMS and waiting lists and making sure those services and provisions are in place. We recognise that more needs to be done. The government is committed to making sure there are mental health provisions in school, and we are also looking at how more closely we can work with the Department of Health to make sure children's mental health needs within children's social care is being addressed and their needs are being met. So we are working on this with the Department of Health, and I'm hoping we'll be able to come back hopefully soon to share that information.
Okay, thank you. We obviously we regarding disabled children care, we've had concerns about families being unable to access support for disabled children due to lack of availability, but also difficulty in understanding their entitlements. We also obviously have already discussed about short breaks and respite care for disabled children. I want to focus on personal budgets, and which we heard these are insufficient for parents of disabled children to meet their children's needs. So will you increase personal budgets to address this?
So obviously this wouldn't just be for the Department of Education, my understanding, it's be cross-department.
Yeah.
So, so what I will do with this question is take it away and look at it and come back to you with a cross-departmental perspective.
Thank you. Amanda.
Thank you. We've heard concerns about parents of disabled children undergoing assessment processes, focusing on child protection concerns when engaging with children's social care, even when there's no evidence of neglect or abuse. Will you take forward the Law Commission's recommendations that, whilst keeping children safe, on improving assessments of disabled children to address this problem?
So obviously this situation does need to be addressed where that is found, and I mean the Law Commission, as we're aware, is undertaking an independent review of disabled children's social care legislation with a report that's due in this summer 2025. So we will review this when this is brought to our attention, and we will look at what the recommendations are, and then we'll follow up with a response.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Jess.
The Children's Wellbeing Bill contains a number of measures to improve the child protection system. Are you confident that these reforms will be enough to significantly reduce the number of children suffering serious harm?
We don't want any children to obviously experience any significant harm or to be at risk of harm. And the reason why we've brought in the areas that we have done within the bill is to ensure that we have other departments that are key players that are playing their part, making sure they're putting all of the protective factors in place and acting as corporate parents. The unique identifier number will also act as an area in which we can but the information on the child is in one place. So therefore we can easily identify and pick up what types of vulnerabilities and risk factors the child is exposed to. So therefore we're trying to cut out any to make it seamless so that we're aware of the child's experience, and that is able to be picked up in a way in which safeguards and protects the child. There is always more that can be done. It will be reviewed, continue to be reviewed, but we need to make sure that the various departments and professionals are all working together with a determined effort to make sure that we're keeping children safe and protected. I was also going to say that in terms of ICSA and the recommendations that have come out of that, I haven't met with Alexis J, and the Home Secretary has also given a commitment that those recommendations will be met, and that there'll be more information coming out, she said, before Easter on that.
Can I just add one small point, which is the provision in the bill on children not in school registers, which we think is really important to ensure visibility of all children, and that children can't disappear, because we have seen some children fall through the cracks and the system not pick up on them. And also there an ending to the automatic right to homeschool a child if there's concerns about safeguarding, which I think are two important measures in the bill to help improve safeguarding.
Thank you. Obviously, one of the ways in which you know whether the legislation has been successful is by being able to measure whether harm has increased or decreased. But NSPCC data suggests that data on child protection plans does not reflect the true prevalence of child abuse and neglect. So in order to understand whether the bill has had effect, do you intend to carry out research to better understand this?
We need to review, and we need to carry on monitoring to make sure it is achieving its aims. And I am due to meet with NSPCC as well, so I will take that with them.
Okay, thank you. And just in the section, neglect is the only type of abuse that has increased over the last year. What specifically are you going to tackle neglect and ensure that social care is set up to respond to it?
So the plan is that through it's recognised by any of the agencies that the child or the family come into communication with, usually it's the school, then they have a corporate parenting responsibility to draw attention to that. And this is why the Family Hubs process is so key on getting this right, to make sure that we can put in the parenting support that's needed and put in any factors of protection that's needed around that child and working with that family to prevent neglect. Also recognise that either family group conference decision making or family meetings could have a real impact in making sure the protective measures are there. But where a child is experiencing neglect and they're at significant harm, then it may also be that other interventions need to take place to keep that child safe. I'm also going to bring Fran in.
It was just to say that the new data we have suggests that the leading cause of a child coming into care now is parental mental health, whereas it previously was domestic abuse. And I think there's a real overlap there in terms of neglect and mental ill health. And so the family help reforms that we referred to earlier, I think, are key there. So a lot of these families don't intend to do a bad job by their children. They love their children, but for various reasons, mental ill health, poverty, adverse circumstances, they are failing to do that. That clearly needs an intervention, but it isn't always an intervention to remove the child. More often it's actually to support the parents to do a good job to look after the child. And so that's what our strategy through the legislation and the investment is intending to do. Thank you.
And obviously makes the case for making sure that there's the cross-departmental mental health support in place. Otherwise, those parents won't get the support they need.
I'll just bring Caroline in very briefly on that point.
You wanted to raise the issue of neglect, which is a rising form of child abuse. Some would say that failing to brush your children's teeth on a morning or ensure that they're brushed, or failure to give your child breakfast on a morning, is a form of neglect for parenting. Now, the government has chosen, rather than to set the expectation that parents do this, that they've brought this sort of in-house and asked the state to do it with their supervised toothbrushing sessions and their breakfast provision. That we did hear in evidence to this committee that in Wales the breakfast provision has not achieved the target of targeting the children that needed the breakfast. Although it may have provided breakfast to children, it wasn't the children they were trying to provide breakfast to. So are the government's measures actually going to work, and are they a tacit acceptance of or tolerance of a level of neglect?
So we don't want children to go to school hungry.
Nobody does.
Nobody does. That was my next word that I was going to say. So nobody wants children to go to school hungry. We want children to be able to focus on their learning. Neither do we want children to have tooth decay or any issues associated with that. I hear the point that's made and the evidence that's made. We need to. This is why education is a key safeguarding partner. To be able to pick up on issues in areas where families need the support and the intervention. So if there are
That's
situations...
not what you've done with respect, Minister. You haven't said we've got children that are not getting breakfast, we need to make sure those children get breakfast. You said we've got children that are not being fed breakfast, we need to feed every child in the country breakfast. So you haven't targeted support, the early support that you've talked about through this meeting, at those who need it most. You've insisted the state do the job that parents are meant to do.
What I'm saying is that we don't want any child to go hungry, so therefore we have the rollout of the breakfast clubs. And that provides an opportunity for families or a parent to take their child to school early to be able to have breakfast and therefore not to be hungry. If there is a situation where teachers recognise or pick up that a child comes to school, isn't coming to the breakfast club but is still hungry, then that's something they need to raise, the conversation they need to have with that parent, and they need to then work out, is there anything further that needs to be done? Is there any support that needs to be in place? Is there anything that the parents need help with? And then that intervention needs to happen and needs to take place.
Give that to Jess. Thank you. just going to move on to child sexual abuse and the proposed mandatory reporting duty for child sexual abuse, which is included in the crime policing bill, has a narrower scope than that recommended by the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. Are you satisfied that this will be robust enough, especially given that there is no criminal sanction for failing to report the duty? And are you also satisfied that the sector is prepared for the introduction of this new duty?
These are all still being worked out and looked at, and it's still being looked at, still being worked out, and in terms of putting all the information together is still there. It does still need to be reviewed, and we still need to look at it, and we need to make sure that the protective factors are in place for children. I don't know if you've got anything further to say on that. I'd like to take that away and review that, actually, what you're saying.
So are you anticipating there might be amendments to the bill? It's still being looked at? Because we've had the second reading on the bill, the measures in the bill, and yet you're saying it's still being looked at.
What I mean is in terms of ICSA and what the department is looking at and how we continue to work with the Home Office on the recommendations.
But Jess's question was about a specific recommendation about mandatory reporting and the specific version of that recommendation which is in the bill, which is different from the version that ICSA recommended. And so, is that still under review?
That's not something I was aware of, to be really honest. So let me take that away and have a look at it.
Okay, thank you. And just that point as well about the sector. Obviously, there is the potential for this to have wide-ranging impacts on the sector, particularly in terms of children's social care workers. There have been concerns around, for example, safe spaces for children like Childline being brought into the ambit of this in an unhelpful way, leading to children not being able to seek support, knowing that their conversation, will be confidential. To what extent have you been having conversations with organisations across the sector who might be impacted by this?
I'll pass that to you, Fran.
So as the Minister said, the specific bill that you referred to is a Home Office piece of legislation. So we as a department are consulted and are engaged, and particularly in ensuring that there aren't any adverse consequences from it. I guess in framing any new legislative provision like this, there's always a balance, isn't there, in terms of having the broadest reach possible, but not having those unintended consequences of avoiding children seeking help or avoiding them reaching out and sharing concerns. So absolutely, we're working closely with the Home Office to ensure that things like Childline can continue to operate in a safe and supportive way for children where they need that support. So that, I guess that's the sort of ongoing debates that the Minister was referring to, just to ensure that the implementation of it works well and doesn't create any harm that was not intended.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just got some questions on Ofsted reforms now. So Ofsted is the government's committed to replacing the Ofsted single word judgments in its inspections of children's services and children's social care providers. When will this process start? And how will you ensure that the safety of children is paramount as the reforms implemented?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are changing inspections in children's social care, Ofsted, and is committed to removing the single headline. Ofsted hasn't started in terms of children, but Ofsted is consulting in the consultation process.
And do you have any indication of the timescale for that in terms of?
Not at present.
So my wording is classic government wording of in due course. So it is going to happen, but I can't give you a particular time frame as yet. It's an Ofsted consultation.
And then we've heard evidence that many children's home providers are reluctant to accept children with complex needs because of fears that it might affect their Ofsted rating. And that's exacerbating problems with capacity of provision. What measures are you taking to address this?
That's the information like that is very concerning, because what that does, it just places more, as you're aware, more pressures on the local authorities to be able to find appropriate placements, and then that in itself can be very difficult in terms of the impact of driving up cost. it is something that was put in local authorities with, and it is something that we will also be looking at through the regional care cooperatives.
And specifically, I mean, what might you do to address it?
So I'm happy to sort of add to what you've said. So I guess the whole approach of the reforms that we've talked about today are to reduce the number of children coming into care to begin with, so and to stabilise the market and to provide alternative placements for children. So that cherry picking that you're talking about absolutely does happen and is really problematic, and it's often for these children with the most complex needs who are perhaps difficult to care for, and so the home might refuse to offer a place.
I suppose the question is about how the inspection framework might be redesigned to de-risk the taking of those children with the most complex needs for the providers, because there will still be children with complex needs in the system, even if you just get more numbers.
And we hear some really difficult stories like that, and I'm sure the committee's heard some of those too, but we do also hear, on the flip side, some really positive stories. I went to Wakefield a while ago, and they've got an in-house provision for children with really complex needs, some of whom have actually not managed to hold a placement in a secure children's home, have been basically served notice even in a secure children's home, but Wakefield have brought them into their locality, set up a placement for them and said, whatever happens, you're safe here and you can stay here. And actually those children's needs have de-escalated because some of it is a sort of a trauma response. And so through some of the investment that I talked about earlier, the capital investment, we want more local authorities to do similar things to Wakefield so that more children can have those needs met and not bounce around the system with sort of growing levels of trauma.
Yeah. And then we've had concerns expressed to us about the use of handcuffs to support children between care placements, which Ofsted has said is a gap in regulation. Is this something you're looking at addressing?
We're looking into this. Yeah, this does raise concerns, and it is something that we need to look into. Absolutely.
And then can I just ask finally, so we're about to have a statement on government's welfare reforms. Can I ask what engagement you've had with the Department for Work and Pensions on the potential impact of welfare reforms on children and on child poverty?
So a fellow director in the Department for Education, Donna Ward, leads on child poverty strategy. So it's not specifically children's social care, because clearly lots of families will be suffering poverty but won't be involved in the children's social care system. Mm-hmm. And so she's very, very closely involved. I think she's on the cross-government board that the DWP have set up, and working sort of really in partnership about how families and children can be supported out of poverty.
And is the department confident that what the government's going to announce today won't have any adverse impacts on child poverty?
So I don't think I can answer that for you today, and I'm not sure whether the Minister can.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, to be really honest, we need to wait until we hear what the announcement is to know.
But as part of the government, have you sought any assurances from the Department for Work and Pensions about the impact on child poverty of the reforms that are going to be announced today?
So the child poverty area is being obviously there's a departmental meetings that is chaired by Liz Kendall and the Secretary of State for DWP and for Education. So they would have at that level, I would imagine, they would have been consulted on this. That information hasn't been brought for my attention to have those conversations.
Are you concerned about it?
I'm concerned because I want to hear the information, and then and if there is any pending effect on children's welfare needs and families, then I'm interested to hear what it's got to say, and if there is an impact, and what that impact may or may not be. But I want to ensure that children have the best care that they need, really.
Thank you. Okay, that brings our evidence session to a close. Can I thank our witnesses for giving your evidence to us today? Order. That's the end of our proceedings for today.
Thank you.